All right, everyone. So I got another interesting video here to share with you guys. I got Chris from Liminal Spaces. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with his channel. He's got a great channel. We're into a lot of the same kind of reading and science fiction. And we had been kind of chatting and on each other's channels, and we were both kind of getting ready to read Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light. And so we kind of just organized a bit of a buddy read. We both read it, and we're gonna discuss all this today. So thanks for joining me, Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to get to talk to you.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to do this more often. So
Agreed.
so I guess we'll start with like a quick synopsis of what this book is about. Then we'll go into some interesting facts and the publication of this one, maybe some awards it won, go over some pros and cons, and then just kind of wrap it up with some of our final thoughts.
Yeah,
So,
that sounds great.
so you want to start off kind of what the synopsis or overall kind of gist of this one is?
Yeah. So this is the story of a planet that has been colonized from a ship sent from kind of the last remnants of Earth, of humanity and Earth. Um, and they go to this planet and they start using this is what they listed: chemical treatments, biofeedback, and electronics to create magical aspects of themselves. And they deal with the natives of this planet, which are beings who have transcended bodies and are now creatures of lightning. And they have problems and fights with these natives. They start creating children and more descendants and generations on this planet. And what they end up doing, which is really strange when you really get down and think about it, they end up recreating India and the Indian caste system and place themselves with their magic powers. And they have the ability, they also have the scientific ability to place souls in new bodies. So they create reincarnation, and they place themselves at the top of this caste system as gods. And they replicate the Hindu pantheon and place them, each of themselves, into these positions that they have genetically engineered themselves to have the magic powers of these specific gods. And they place themselves at the head of this society, and then they begin to repress the technological advancement of their descendants. So they will not let them move past a medieval level of technology, because they're afraid that once they move past that level, they won't worship them as gods anymore. And this story is specifically the story of one of these aspects, and I'm not going to be able to say his full name. I don't know if you can, Ira. But
Bam.
yeah, he calls himself Sam,
Yeah.
which makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
Um, and he does the brilliant idea that he comes up with is to recreate Buddhism in this environment, to try, and he's what they call an accelerationist.
Hmm.
And he recreates Buddhism and becomes the Buddha to try and uh, free these people from the tyranny of this Hindu pantheon that his shipmates have created.
As well as the locals, the aliens that are
Yes.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Y- Yeah, and this book is so interesting because it reads like a fantasy, and there's all this Hindu and Buddhist myth and deities and everything in it. But in between all the lines and everything, it's a really a science fiction story. And
Yeah.
the technology really isn't gone into great lengths to explain how the souls are removed, but this is this is all packed into a just over 300-page book. And
Yeah.
so he took some liberties there to just bring up these ideas, but not really go into great depths of how they work.
Yeah, I have a quote from Zelazny that he says, let me see if I can find it here. Um, he wanted to write a book that could be taken as science fiction or a fantasy novel. And I think he definitely achieved that. And it's funny because now we have a total genre for it, science fantasy.
Yeah.
But at the time I think he was doing something pretty cutting edge.
Yeah. And me leaning a little bit more, I like fantasy, but I lean toward more towards the science fiction. And anytime I could pick
Me too.
out that the elements in there that made this science fiction when they were talking about the first people that had come on this ship and then it kind of became more of a real story that could happen besides, instead of this fantasy. And I love those parts, how they were mixed in. And you had to wait all the way to the end to get some of the pieces filled in, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really true. It's really
Yeah.
true. Hold on. What is I want to name drop another channel really quick, Ira. It is Sci-Fi Scavenger. Are you familiar with his stuff at all?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we started our channels right around the same time and when
He's
we
your
had
channel twin.
yeah, we basically had no subscribers and kind of encouraged each other in the beginning.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
Sci-Fi Scavenger, I noticed, has recently read this book as well, and he talked about it really quickly on his channel during his reader's diary videos that he does, and he made a really good point, and it's something that we'll probably have to get to with the cons and pros and all that later. But he was left wondering at the end of this book why they would do all this. Why would they work so hard to recreate India with them on top as gods? And I think that's a really good question that he asks, because it seems like an awful lot of work to it's of course they're going to want to keep control over the populace, but it seems like an awful lot of work to recreate India. But we'll get into that in a bit. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting, and he expressed that very well. He just was like, "Why?" and
Yeah.
it made perfect sense. It was a good question.
All right, so that's a pretty good overview of everything then, I guess. I the way you summed it up was great because, you brought it the science fiction element, which at its core is these colonists on this alien planet, but it takes a while to really understand what's going on in this book. So I love
Yeah,
the way you describe that. So
yeah, yeah. Well, you're right. I've taken the back end and kind of popped it onto the first part.
yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into it later, but even the structure of the novel, it's not apparent at first what order these events are happening in, and it does become pretty obvious at a certain point, but I have a tip for people, and I don't think it spoils anything. And I think later, I went into this pretty blind, and I think I really would have appreciated the tip
Yeah,
about understanding if the book seems out of order, it probably is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was shocked by how much that I was like, oh, we're going to get a little bit of a backstory. And then that was like the core of the novel.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
the part that I thought was the main part was just bookends. It was
Yep.
really interesting how long that backstory was. And I kept kind of wanting to get back to the original and eventually or the timeline that we started in, but I eventually just had to kind of give up on that and enjoy the flow once I realized, okay, this novel is really this middle story, this story of the past is the main novel.
Yep. Yeah, because the story is broken up into seven pretty good sized chapters.
Yeah,
And I guess we can just talk about it. The first chapter actually goes in between the sixth and seventh. So the meat of the book is all that preliminary stuff leading up to the first chapter, and then the final chapter is just your finally you get the conclusion, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's somewhere in the
Would your tip be to read it in a different order?
no, just to understand, because like when I got into that second chapter, it wasn't apparent that we went back. I mean, in hindsight, it really was because, there's some characters that were um, not, quite so friendly with someone.
Right.
And so you're like, wait a minute, I thought this guy just saved this person. Why would they not be friendly? And so later, as I kept reading, became very apparent, but there was nothing, stating now 16 years earlier or anything like that, so.
Right.
Which I love that kind of stuff. It makes you work for the plot and kind of earn it and
Yeah.
not spoon
Yeah.
fed to you.
And Zelazny's kind of known for that in this era.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. All
All
right.
right. Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah, let's get into the publication history a little bit. I'll go over, I know you mentioned something that I want you to talk about, but this one won the 1968 Hugo Award. And I mean, I know a couple other books that came out at that in this time, and I could see why this one won for sure.
Yeah, and
It
it
was,
was.
what's that?
Oh, good. I was going to say it was also nominated for the Nebula for the same thing.
Yeah, and Samuel R. Delaney's The Einstein Intersection won ahead of this. And I don't know if you've read that book.
Not yet. It's on my list here.
It's very bizarre. I didn't really it didn't really gel with me. I didn't really like it very much at all, and I some of it could have went over my head, but it's so creative and inventive. I mean, I can see why it probably won, the Nebula, but there's a lot of interesting stuff that was coming out in this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was published in 67 and is the first Zelazny to have a hardback.
Oh,
I know
okay.
that later his first two novels eventually had hardbacks, but this is the first hardback that I know of that Roger Zelazny got, and I'm sure that was super exciting for him
Oh, yeah.
to have a hardback book. This is a book club edition.
I love
Uh,
that cover.
it's great. It's really wild. I'm sure you might have to put up a picture of it. And in the back, it's
Yeah.
got like Secret Agent Roger Zelazny on the back there, looking quite dapper.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm on the hunt for that. That if I find that book club, it's going into my
it
personal
was.
library.
I had to wait and wait and wait because it was too dang expensive on the on eBay. These two were my reading copies.
Yeah, this is my kind of it's a later print, but it's like a replica of what the first paperback looks like from
Yeah.
Avon.
Yeah,
And
I think this is 80s. Mine is.
yeah.
And look at does yours have the red? I
Oh
love that.
yeah.
Yeah, that red is super cool.
And there's a lot of Zelazny books that have this same livery with this
Yeah,
design. And I don't know if I have them all yet, but like Creatures of Light and Dark and Doorways in the Sand and a bunch of those have that same look and
yeah,
everything.
yeah. I've got a bunch as well.
And
They're
then
cool.
this was my reading copy. It's a
Oh,
Avon from later.
yeah, that
And
one I've never seen. That's
let's
cool.
see if it'll focus. I'll have to put a picture up, but there's kind of
Yeah,
an interesting scene going on here.
this is the British one. This is Panther.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think Panther's British, right?
Yeah.
UK.
Yep.
Yeah, first published in Great Britain by Faber in 1968.
And so his Zelazny's first book was actually Dream Master, right?
Yeah, this is so confusing. This
Yeah,
is so
there's some
confusing because everywhere lists this immortal because people don't count magazine publications as first publications. I don't know why, but
yeah.
Dream Master was published before um, Call Me Conrad or This Immortal in the magazine, but
In its entirety, right?
well, a
In
novella
parts.
version. Yeah,
Oh,
just like
okay.
yeah. So this Immortal was no, I'm sorry. So Dream Master was published before Call Me Conrad in the magazines, and I have all these magazines. Um, and it was a novella, and then he published and Call Me Conrad, but they truncated it. So they edited that one down and made and released that as a novella, and then he uh released Call Me Conrad as This Immortal before Dream Master, because he had, of course, more to add. It was truncated. So he released that as his first novel. And then Dream Master, he expanded into a novel and released that second. So
Okay.
it's semantics. I don't know
Yeah.
which. I would like to know which one was written first.
And
That's
and and then this would be basically his third.
yeah. This is his
Yeah.
third.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I've got to go back and read Dream Master. These are the only I've read This Immortal and Lord of Light, so I've got the gap, and then probably eventually kind of just try to go in chronological order. I know that's kind of what you're doing, right?
yeah, that's what I'm doing. But I'm going to take a break. The next
Yeah.
one is this same story, but Egyptian mythology.
Uh-huh.
And I feel like This Immortal was close to this same story with Greek mythology, so I need a break. So I'm going to go back and read some of his novellas that were before
Yeah.
um, all of them. I'm gonna read four stories or whatever it's called. But yeah, I'm
Oh
gonna read
yeah.
some
I got that
novellas.
one.
Yeah, just because I need a break from man as
Yeah.
gods for a while.
Yeah, this book took it out of me keeping up with everything that was going on, the plot, the
Yeah,
characters. It was a challenge, but it's a rewarding challenge for sure.
it was absolutely epic in its scope, and I find that stuff that's epic has a tendency to have so many characters. And there
Yeah.
were times when I just had to like take a break. And I think you read it a lot faster than I did. I was still finishing it up to last week,
Yeah.
uh, just because I was it was slow going. It was slow going, especially. I don't like long retellings of war. That's why Lord of the Rings is hard for me in places. Even The Hobbit when I was a kid, I absolutely love The Hobbit when I was a kid. But the end I didn't like as much because it was just this big war. And for some odd
Hmm.
reason, there's nothing wrong with writing about that. It's important to write about that, I think. But long explanations of war have a tendency to slow me down, except for the
Yeah.
Iliad. The Iliad didn't bug me that much, which is crazy because it's like super fat and all about war. But Homer went to all kinds of different interesting ways to discuss war. But anyway, there was a movie planned to be made of this book. And it was that was going to happen in 1979. They had a planned budget of 50 million, which is huge for 79. And they were going to make the sets and make them permanent. And once the movie was done, they were going to have the sets be a science fiction theme park, and they were doing all this in Aurora, Colorado, which is a little Denver, a little part
Yeah.
of Denver, which would have been awesome if that occurred. I would love to be able to go to a science fiction theme park that has sets based on Lord of Light, the movie. And they got comic book artist Jack Kirby. Are you familiar with Jack Kirby at all?
I've heard the name, but couldn't
Yeah, I
say
don't.
what he did.
I didn't know much about him either, and I didn't really look into it. But Jack Kirby was hired, and he did all the set designs and wrote the script for this movie version of Lord of Light. And unfortunately, legal problems killed the project. And that is literally all that I can find. I don't know what legal problems killed the project, just legal problems. So it didn't happen. But and this is where this gets really wild and interesting. The CIA acquired the script and the set designs for this unmade film and used it for, or they used it as cover for the Canadian Caper. They called this job that they were going to do the Canadian Caper. And what it was is they went and pretended to be filmmakers and went and rescued American troops from the Middle East. And of course, this was eventually made into a film that was called Argo, a film that is based on true events called Argo. And all of the script and all the set designs and everything that they used to make this seem like they were really making a film were these pieces of the Lord of Light movie that never got made.
That's
Really
interesting.
wild.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting that at least I guess the set and the script got to serve some purpose if it wasn't made, but
Right. Man, could you
this
imagine that movie?
yeah, it's a hard movie to imagine. It's and getting into we'll get into the cons later. This was a hard book to I visualize a lot of things and some of these scenes were just hard to imagine, and it'd be very hard to film something and pull it off well, I
Yeah.
think, in a
Yeah,
live
I think
action at least.
I think they need David Lynch to do it. Make it like Dune.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I agree. I agree. But yeah, let's I guess go into the pros.
yeah. We can maybe just alternate back and forth some
Yeah,
pros that each of us have. Maybe you want to start?
yeah. So this is epic in scope. I think it probably could have made a great film if they got a director that really was able to look at the tech in a unique and weird way. So that, I mean, even a Blade Runner style look to this could have worked. Just so that the tech was super weird and it had this mix of fantasy and science fiction. Um, I think that some of the themes of this book are absolutely incredible. For instance, the concept that withholding technological advancement is a way to keep people enslaved to the powers that have the technology. And I think that that was, for me, really interesting to read. These people keep inventing things like the printing press and the bicycle and all this other stuff. And the gods wipe them out when they do that because they do not want them to advance and have a renaissance, because once they do, they'll turn their back on religion. Which leads me to my second pro. The concept of religion is really taken apart and looked at in this novel, which I thought was incredible. Um, I'm going to leave this to you to take out if you want to, Ira, because this is the only thing that I really want to spoil in this book. So one of the concepts that they bring in later is the concept of Christianity. And it's interesting because why didn't they choose Christianity? Back to, what's his name? Oh, yeah. Back to Sci Fi Scavenger's idea of why did they do this? Taken a little farther, why did they choose Hindu? Uh,
Mhm.
which is never explained in this book. But they have Christianity start to grow with this other faction, and they want to keep that down. And even that kind of echoed humanity's movement from these polytheistic pantheons to monotheistic religion, which I thought was so well done. And this is what I love about Roger Zelazny, is that he's very well read and he's very smart, and you can dive into these books, and his themes have such strong play in the works themselves, and this one was no different than the first two in that, and I really enjoyed reading those themes throughout the book. Those are kind of the pros for me.
Yeah, and to expand on that, I guess a little bit, there's kind of a cynical edge to some of it too, like the idea of the prayer machines,
Yeah,
where it kind of keeps track of your tithing in a way.
yeah,
And
they're like coin slot machines, right?
yeah, and then that kind of feeds into your level of reincarnation in the future. And the way the reincarnation was brought in, I thought was really cool to make that a science fiction element. And when we start off in the book, it was like a new technology that they had, this like brain probe. So
Yeah,
you couldn't hide anything, and your reincarnation was based on your actual, brain probe. And so that kind of frightened some people. They couldn't hide behind or hide secrets away of what they've done or what they thought. And
and the
this could
brain
dem
probe kind of replaced karma.
yeah,
They would just
yeah,
read the karma on the screen.
yeah. It was the science fiction, you know, version of that where you know, they're the gods. They were
Yeah.
actually, you know, reading that like a god would, but it was and just that's the blend of science fiction and fantasy is great. I love these books that really explore the difference between it and showcase how similar they could be and how, you know, different they can be. I'm running out of time, I think.
10 minutes, we can do it.
Okay. Yeah, and then, you know, some of the there's a couple chapters in particular. There was chapter 3 that had to do with that character Rild, and he was sent, you know, to assassinate Sam,
Yes.
and Sam converts him, and I thought that was just done so well. And it was such an interesting concept because Sam was he was willing to admit that he was an imposter. He wasn't really the Buddha. He
Yeah.
was kind of, you know, giving off the impression he wasn't telling people he wasn't, but um, that whole storyline with Rild, and I won't completely spoil what happens in there, but it's a really cool twist to that little interaction with those two.
And probably the most entertaining read part of the read, in my opinion.
Yeah,
That
that
section.
chapter, and then part of chapter 4 with when Sam goes to kind of liberate the native population, these
Hmm.
demons, which they were called.
Yeah.
And that scene, that was the one scene I could visualize, and I just loved it, where he was going down into those like caves, and there was spirits like, you know, trying to get him to look at them and you know, release them from this grip
Yeah.
that he had basically put them all in. So that
Yeah.
whole scene was done really well too, I thought.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Overall, I mean, it was he merged everything really well. It was really well written.
Yeah.
I don't have many faults really with it, but are you
I
ready to get
found
into
that
the cons?
I found that the further away I get from it and the more that I think about it, the more that I like it.
Yeah,
There were parts of this reading experience that weren't as enjoyable to me. And I guess that would be the con. Um, in the sense that I felt at times that I was just reading kind of straight fantasy and wanted a little bit more explanation of the weirdness of what the tech would be like.
yeah,
I feel like if he fell slightly more on the science fiction side, this novel would have been really maybe a little bit stronger than it is.
hmm,
Um, I feel like every book that I read in his bibliography as I go forward, starting from the Dream Master to this Immortal to this, is getting a little bit more accessible and a little bit more normal. And that's not a bad thing. And that's a great thing for Roger Zelazny because he sells more books. But I do miss some of his uniqueness from those earlier novels as he becomes more and more accessible. For large swaths of this, I felt like I was reading just a regular fantasy novel, and that I hate to use that as a con because I do read fantasy. I read a lot more science fiction than I do fantasy, but I loved the Earthsea trilogy that I did, and Mary Stewart's Merlin trilogy. But yes, fantasy can sometimes, when there's lots of intrigue and this faction's going to go to war against this faction, I don't like that as much. So that's not a con of the novel. That's
yeah,
just the novel not being what I specifically crave in my Roger Zelazny experience. And this is, I feel like, probably his most famous book after Amber.
yeah.
I feel
Yep.
like people talk about this all the time.
Well, it's funny you mentioned like in hindsight liking it more, and I don't know if this is just something that happens with BookTube and finding people that we can have these discussions, but me and Matt and Richard have been reading through these best ofs,
Yeah.
and we have both been saying, or all of us have been saying, like, there's a lot of times we're not really liking these stories, but once we get together and start talking about them, we're like, wait, I think we really like this story.
Yeah, yeah, it's
So,
strange. You guys just did Liber, and I
yeah,
watched that happen over the video.
Yeah, it kind of happened. And this is the same way. It's like some of
Yeah,
the points you're bringing up. And yeah, I think there was times where it was a bit of a chore and I didn't like it so much. But um, like, I guess just to go into some cons, it's not really a con. I definitely want to reread this one in the future because maybe multiple times because this the first time through, I think you probably agree, you're not going to get everything.
no.
And my only two cons are basically kind of tips for people, probably. One is the book is a bit out of order, and just know that and go with it, and you'll figure it out. You can find where people tell you exactly which order, and we probably already mentioned it, but
Yeah,
that's one thing. And then the other con that I had was there's a lot of characters, they get reincarnated, they swap bodies of these gods.
they
They
have
can
three
get,
names.
yeah, the Sam has like five or six names, I think.
Seriously.
And so I'm one that does this when I read fantasy and I know there's a lot of characters, and I actually did it in this one where as soon as a character was introduced, I wrote down their name. I wrote down the aliases as we went through. I wrote down when they switched bodies,
Smart.
and that kind of helped keep it all in order for me. But without
Mhm.
that, I completely would have been lost on a lot of these characters. So if you're someone like that that struggles with a lot of characters, I would write down some of them as you go through the book.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on this idea of a movie. I think this could be awesome if you
Yeah.
got somebody that would make it would have to be the weirdest looking
Yeah.
stuff, right? Like what would the reincarnation machine and this is could maybe go on cons or pros, I have no idea, but the reincarnation machine must be the weirdest tube
Yeah.
laden strange ass piece of technology that in existence, and I'm sad that he didn't explain that. Instead he just made it a temple.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have to be really atmospheric and yeah, some really strange tech. And like
Yeah.
there was this scene where, these two gods are basically fighting by punching each other in the face. And
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking to yourself, they're gods. They have all these powers. Are they really just punching themselves, punching
Right.
each other in the face? Like, is
Yeah.
that really what's going on? Or is there some, you know, spirit thing happening in there? It was some of the scenes were hard to visualize, but if someone could nail that in a movie,
Yeah.
it'd be fantastic.
Yeah, this might work better as a movie in some ways if they were able to really visualize the weirdness. Because I
Yeah.
think if I reread this, I would make it super weird in my head. I would force it because you said
Yeah.
earlier it's kind of hard to visualize. I think I would try to just be like, what does the inside of this temple where they reincarnate people look like from a technological aspect with all these weird
Yeah.
religious things? And he gets into it a little bit. There's a phone that they can call
Hmm.
the heaven, as they call it.
Yeah, their
Um,
base.
yeah, and there's this phone, and it has religious symbology on it with the snake eating its own tail, but also is a phone. It's a view screen. Like I think that in Roger's head, this was probably really kick ass the way he merged all of it. So I would
Yeah.
recommend it. In the end, I think I would recommend this book, but
Yeah.
take your time with it. There's parts that are a slog. There really are.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess just wrapping it up, you got any other thoughts or anything? Like you
No,
said,
I think I
recommend.
enjoy it in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I think it's an ambitious novel. I think he pulled it off technically. I think if you know anything about the written word and you really analyze what he did here, I mean, this is truly a masterpiece. And the only thing I feel like some of it was lost on me, and I definitely plan on rereading it in the future. I would love to do a more of a deep dive with you
Sure.
sometime, maybe in the
Yeah.
future or maybe years from now if we decide to reread it or something like that. But
Yeah, I think if you knew the Hindu religion
yeah,
inside and out, this would probably have a layer of coolness even further.
for sure, to know
Yeah.
how he wrote those gods into it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, Ira. It's been wonderful.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And I'll link everyone to your channel, of course. I'm sure most people have seen you. You got a great channel. I love watching your videos and hope to
Thank
get
you.
to
I've
talk
been
to you
watching
soon.
yours for a while, so I'm glad to be able to talk with you like this.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.